My name is Sarah Matthews, and 25 years after graduation, I drove my 15-year-old Honda Civic into the parking lot of the Grand Vista Country Club, knowing full well I didn't belong there. The valet looked at my car like it had personally offended him, then handed me a ticket without making eye contact. I smoothed down my simple black dress, the same one I'd worn to 3 funerals and a courthouse hearing, and walked through the marble entrance of what used to be farmland when we were kids. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The ballroom sparkled under crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than my annual salary. Round tables draped in gold linens filled the space, each one adorned with centerpieces that looked like they belonged in a museum. A jazz quartet played softly in the corner, while servers in crisp white uniforms glided between clusters of perfectly groomed alumni, carrying champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvre I couldn't pronounce. I found the registration table tucked near the entrance, manned by 2 women I vaguely recognized from the student council. They wore matching smiles and designer dresses that screamed success. One of them, a blonde with tennis-tan skin, squinted at her laptop screen as I approached. "Name?" she asked without looking up. "Sarah Matthews." Her manicured finger scrolled down the list. Matthews, oh." Her expression shifted slightly, like she'd tasted something unexpected. "You're actually here." The brunette beside her leaned over, reading the screen. "Wow, Sarah Matthews, I remember you. Didn't you used to sit in the back of chemistry class? Always had your nose in a book?" I nodded, accepting the name tag they reluctantly handed me. It was plain white with black text. No special borders or gold accents like the ones I'd seen other people wearing. No indication of achievements or accolades, just my name floating in empty space. "Table 47, the blonde said, pointing toward the far corner of the room, by the service entrance. I made my way through the crowd, passing tables filled with familiar faces that had aged into success. Dr. Morrison, now apparently a renowned cardiologist according to his gold-bordered name tag. Jennifer Walsh, whose tag proclaimed her as CEO, Walsh Marketing Solutions. Marcus Thompson, whose tag simply read, State Senator. Table 47 was exactly where I expected it to be, tucked away from the main action, near the swinging doors where servers rushed in and out carrying empty plates. My table mates included a handful of people I barely remembered. The guy who used to fix cars in shop class, a woman who'd been in my homeroom but never spoke, and 2 empty chairs that would apparently remain that way. The conversation at my table was stilted and awkward. Everyone seemed to be calculating whether anyone else at the table was worth networking with, and finding the answer lacking. I sipped my water and watched the room come alive around us, feeling like a spectator at someone else's party. From the main stage at the front of the room, Principal Davidson, now white-haired but still imposing, tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen of Lincoln High's class of 1999, welcome to our 25th reunion." Applause rippled through the room as he launched into a speech about tradition, success, and the bright lights that had emerged from their humble, suburban high school. He began introducing distinguished alumni, each one stepping forward to polite applause and admiring murmurs. "Please welcome Dr. Patricia Hoffman, who just completed her 2nd term as Chief of Pediatric Surgery at Boston Children's Hospital." A confident woman in an emerald green dress took the stage, waving gracefully as cameras flashed. I remembered Patricia as the girl who always had perfect notes and never let anyone copy her homework. And our next distinguished alumnus, Michael Chen, founder and CEO of Tech Vantage Solutions, which was just acquired by Google for $2.7 billion. Michael bounded up the steps with the kind of energy that suggested he'd been practicing this moment in mirrors for months. He'd been the quiet kid in computer class who everyone assumed would end up fixing printers for a living. As the introductions continued, I found myself scanning the room for other faces I recognized. That's when I spotted her near the front tables, holding court with a circle of admirers like she was born for it. Vanessa Sterling. She looked exactly like someone who should be featured on magazine covers. Perfectly styled auburn hair, a figure that suggested personal trainers and nutritionists, and a smile that could power small cities. Her rose gold dress probably cost more than most people's cars, and she wore it with the kind of confidence that only comes from never having been told no. Vanessa had been my best friend once, back when we were both awkward 14-year-olds with braces and unrealistic dreams. We'd spent countless afternoons in my bedroom planning our futures, promising we'd always stay close no matter where life took us. She was going to be a famous actress, and I was going to be a diplomat who traveled the world solving international crises. But things changed during our senior year. They always do. Our final distinguished alumnus tonight, Principal Davidson continued, his voice swelling with pride, needs no introduction to anyone who's watched the news in the past 5 years. Please welcome Emmy Award-winning journalist and anchor of Channel 7's primetime news, Vanessa Sterling. The applause was thunderous. People actually stood up. Phones appeared from everywhere, and someone near the front shouted, "We love you, Vanessa." She ascended the stage like she owned it, which, in that moment, she basically did. "Thank you, Lincoln High," she called into the microphone, her voice carrying that same polished cadence I'd heard on television. When I walked these halls 25 years ago, I dreamed of telling stories that mattered, stories that could change minds, save lives, make a difference. She paused for effect, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. Little did I know that some of the most important stories were happening right here among us. Stories of classmates who would go on to save children's lives, revolutionize technology, and yes, even some who disappeared into careers so secret we may never know their true contributions. A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. I felt my stomach tighten. "But tonight isn't about the mysteries," Vanessa continued, her smile widening. "It's about celebrating the achievements we can see, the successes we can measure, the lives that inspire us all." More applause, more camera flashes. I took another sip of water and tried to blend into my chair. After the speeches, the evening shifted into mingling mode. The jazz quartet was replaced by a DJ playing hits from our high school years, and the formal atmosphere loosened into something more casual. Groups formed and reformed as people drifted between tables, sharing stories and catching up on decades of life changes. I stayed at table 47, watching the social dynamics unfold like a nature documentary. The successful alumni gravitated toward each other, forming exclusive clusters that radiated importance. The moderately successful hovered at the edges of these groups, hoping to be noticed, and people like me simply observed from the periphery, invisible and largely forgotten. That's when Vanessa broke away from her admirers and headed straight for my table. She moved with purpose, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor, that camera-ready smile never wavering. Conversations paused as she passed, people turning to watch her progress across the room. When she reached table 47, she placed one perfectly manicured hand on the back of my chair. "Sarah Matthews," she said, and somehow managed to make my name sound like a diagnosis. "I was wondering if you'd actually show up." I looked up at her, taking in the full effect of her transformation. This wasn't Vanessa, who used to cry during sad movies and steal French fries from my lunch tray. This was a carefully constructed version of success, polished and perfected for public consumption. "Hello, Vanessa," I said simply. "It's been so long," she continued, her smile never faltering even as her eyes remained cold. "I heard you were living somewhere out west? Montana? Wyoming? One of those states nobody talks about?" "Something like that." She tilted her head, the gesture perfectly calculated to suggest concern. "And what is it you do out there? I don't think anyone's been able to figure that out." The question hung in the air like smoke. I could feel the attention of nearby tables shifting toward us, sensing drama in the making. This was the moment I was supposed to stumble, to admit that my life hadn't amounted to the dreams we'd once shared, to confirm what everyone already suspected. "I work for the government," I said quietly. Vanessa's laugh was musical and cutting. "Oh, the government! How wonderfully vague. Let me guess. DMV? Post office? Or maybe you're one of those people who processes paperwork for Social Security applications." More people were listening now. I could see phones being subtly pointed in our direction, probably hoping to capture something worthy of social media. The successful alumni had paused their important conversations to witness what was clearly building toward entertainment. Nothing that interesting, I replied. Oh, come on, Sarah, we're all friends here. Surely you can tell us what department? What agency? I mean, unless it's classified or something. She actually giggled at her own joke, and several people around us chuckled along. I felt heat rising in my cheeks, but kept my voice steady. It's complicated. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Complicated, Vanessa repeated, savoring the word. You know what's not complicated? Success, achievement, making something of yourself that other people can see and recognize and celebrate. She gestured around the room. Everyone here has built something meaningful with their lives. We have careers people have heard of, accomplishments people can understand. The circle of listeners had grown larger. I could see Michael Chen recording with his phone, probably already composing the social media post that would turn this moment into viral content. Patricia Hoffman stood at the edge of the group, arms crossed, waiting to see how this would play out. Some people, Vanessa continued, her voice carrying clearly across the now quiet section of the ballroom, just never figure out how to make the leap from dreaming to doing. And that's okay. Not everyone can handle the pressure of real responsibility, real achievement, real success. The words hit like physical blows. I thought about walking away, just standing up and leaving before this got worse. But something in Vanessa's expression stopped me. A flicker of satisfaction, like she was enjoying this more than she should have been. I think, she said, her voice dropping to a stage whisper that somehow carried perfectly, it might be better if you just went home. This is really a night for people who've actually accomplished something with their lives, people who matter. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the DJ seemed to sense something happening and lowered the music. Hundreds of eyes were watching now, waiting to see what would happen next. Some faces showed embarrassment, others curiosity, and a few displayed the kind of cruel anticipation that suggested they were enjoying the spectacle. I stood up slowly, feeling every gaze in the room tracking my movement. My chair scraped against the floor with a sound that seemed to echo forever. For a moment I considered saying something, defending myself, explaining that they had no idea who I really was or what I'd spent the last 25 years doing. Instead, I simply picked up my small purse and walked toward the exit. Behind me, I heard Vanessa's voice, bright and cheerful as if nothing had happened. Well, that was awkward. But honestly, sometimes you have to be direct with people. Now, where were we? Oh yes, I was telling you about my interview with the Secretary of State. The marble lobby felt cooler than the ballroom and blessedly quiet. I made it halfway to the exit before I had to stop and lean against a pillar, my hands shaking slightly. Through the glass doors, I could see my Honda Civic sitting alone in the corner of the parking lot, looking as out of place as I felt. My phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled it out, expecting maybe a text from my neighbor back home, asking about my cats. Instead, the screen showed an encrypted message from a number I recognized but had hoped not to see tonight. Flash priority, immediate deployment required. Situation escalating. Transport en route to your location. ETA 12 minutes. Prepare for extraction. I stared at the message, reading it twice to make sure I wasn't seeing things. Then I looked back through the glass doors at the ballroom, where Vanessa was probably still holding court, where 500 people were continuing their celebration of conventional success, where everyone assumed I was driving home in shame to my insignificant life. They had no idea what was coming. I walked outside into the cool evening air and stood on the steps of the Grand Vista Country Club, looking up at the clear, star-filled sky. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the faint sound of rotors cutting through the night, growing steadily louder. The sound started as a whisper in the distance, barely audible over the muffled music from inside the country club, but it grew steadily, a rhythmic thrum that made the windows vibrate and caused the valet to look up from his magazine with confusion. I remained on the steps, my encrypted phone still glowing in my hand. The message had been clear. 12 minutes. That meant I had about 4 minutes left before my two worlds collided in ways I'd spent years preventing. Inside the ballroom, the celebration continued. Through the tall windows, I could see Vanessa still commanding attention at the center of her admiring circle. She was gesturing animatedly, probably recounting her triumph over the pathetic nobody who dared to show up where she didn't belong. Her audience hung on every word, phones still out, capturing what they assumed was the evening's most entertaining moment. The helicopter sound intensified. Car alarms began chirping in the parking lot as the vibrations triggered their sensors. The valet stood up, shading his eyes against the landscape lighting as he searched the sky. Other staff members emerged from the building, drawn by the increasingly impossible to ignore noise. That's when the first guests started noticing. Through the windows, I watched heads turn toward the ceiling as the chandelier crystals began to tinkle against each other. The jazz music stopped mid-song, the musicians looking around in bewilderment. Conversations faltered as people tried to identify the source of the growing disturbance. Vanessa was still talking when the lights outside suddenly blazed to life. A military helicopter materialized over the country club like something from a movie, its searchlight cutting through the darkness with surgical precision. It wasn't the sleek civilian aircraft wealthy people used for transportation. This was a UH-60 Blackhawk, matte black with no visible markings, the kind of machine that suggested serious government business. The rotor wash hit the building like a hurricane. Trees bent at impossible angles, sending leaves and debris swirling through the air. The carefully maintained landscaping became a chaos of flying mulch and scattered flowers. Every car alarm in the parking lot screamed in unison, creating a symphony of electronic panic. Inside the ballroom, chaos erupted. Women grabbed their updos as the air pressure changes made the building groan. Men loosened their ties, suddenly feeling claustrophobic. The crystal chandeliers swayed ominously, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow across the walls. Someone screamed. Glass clinked as champagne flutes toppled from tables. The helicopter settled onto the country club's pristine front lawn with military precision, its landing skids crushing the prize-winning rose garden into expensive fertilizer. The rotors continued spinning, maintaining ready-to-depart status, which meant this wasn't a social visit. The ballroom doors burst open as people poured out to witness whatever was happening. Vanessa emerged at the front of the crowd, her perfect hair now disheveled, her rose gold dress wrinkled from pressing against bodies, trying to get a better view. Her camera-ready composure had cracked, replaced by genuine confusion and a touch of fear. What the hell is going on? Michael Chen shouted over the noise, his phone out and recording everything. Patricia Hoffman stood beside him, her medical training apparently kicking in as she scanned the crowd for potential injuries from the stampede to get outside. The helicopter's side door slid open with mechanical precision. The first person to emerge was a woman in her 50s wearing a perfectly pressed Navy uniform with enough ribbons and stars to outfit a parade. Her gray hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and she moved with the kind of authority that suggested she'd been making important decisions since before most of the reunion guests were born. Behind her came a younger man in Air Force blues, carrying a tablet and maintaining the alert posture of someone accustomed to high-stakes situations. His eyes constantly scanned the crowd, cataloging threats and escape routes with professional efficiency. But it was the third person who made my chest tighten with professional concern. Director Catherine Walsh stepped from the helicopter like she was exiting a limousine at a state dinner. Despite having just descended from military aircraft, her charcoal suit was immaculate, her silver hair perfectly in place. At 62, she commanded respect from world leaders and struck fear into the hearts of foreign intelligence services. She was also my direct supervisor and someone who definitely shouldn't have been standing on a country club lawn in suburban Connecticut unless something had gone catastrophically wrong. The three officials strode across the ruined landscaping with purpose, their destination clear. The crowd of reunion guests parted automatically, some recognizing the unmistakable aura of federal authority even if they couldn't identify the specific agencies involved. Vanessa stepped forward, her journalist instincts overriding her confusion. "Excuse me, I'm Vanessa Sterling from Channel 7 News. Can you tell us what's happening here? Is this some kind of emergency response?" Director Walsh paused and fixed Vanessa with the kind of look that had made terrorist leaders reconsider their life choices. "Ma'am, I need you to step back and allow us to complete our mission." "Mission?" Vanessa pressed, clearly sensing a story that could define her career. "What kind of mission requires landing a military helicopter at a high school reunion?" The director's gaze shifted past Vanessa and found me standing on the steps. For just a moment, her expression softened with something that might have been relief. "The kind of mission," she said loud enough for the crowd to hear, "that requires the immediate attention of Deputy Director Sarah Matthews." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the car alarm seemed to pause in shock. Vanessa's face went through a series of rapid changes: confusion, disbelief, calculation, and finally something approaching panic. "Deputy Director? Deputy Director of what?" Director Walsh approached the steps where I stood, followed by her uniformed escorts. When she reached me, she executed a slight nod that somehow conveyed both respect and urgency. "Deputy Director Matthews," she said formally, "we have a developing situation that requires your immediate oversight. The National Security Council is convening an emergency session, and your expertise is specifically requested." I felt the weight of 500 stares pressing against me like a physical force. Behind Director Walsh, the crowd had gone completely silent, except for the sound of phone cameras recording every word. "How urgent?" I asked, my voice carrying the professional tone I'd cultivated over years of briefing rooms and crisis management. "Level 4 protocols are in effect as of 23 minutes ago," she replied, and I saw her jaw tighten slightly. "We have confirmation of the breach, and it's spreading faster than initial projections suggested." The technical language meant nothing to the reunion guests, but it told me everything I needed to know. Somewhere in the world, a carefully constructed intelligence operation had just collapsed, putting lives at risk and potentially compromising national security. The kind of situation that required someone with my specific skill set and security clearance to fix before it became an international incident. "My secure gear is in D.C., I said. "Already aboard the aircraft," the Air Force officer responded, holding up his tablet. "Full briefing materials, encrypted communications, and authorization codes updated as of 18 minutes ago." I nodded and stepped down from the country club stairs, moving toward the helicopter. The crowd unconsciously formed a corridor, people stepping back as if they were in the presence of something they didn't understand but instinctively respected. That's when Vanessa found her voice again. "Wait," she called out, her journalist persona reasserting itself. "Sarah, what is this? Deputy Director of what agency? How long have you been working in intelligence? Why didn't anyone know about this?" I paused and turned back to face her. The same woman who had publicly humiliated me 15 minutes earlier now stood in the wreckage of her assumptions, her perfect evening destroyed by the revelation that she'd just attempted to embarrass someone who outranked most of the officials she'd interviewed in her career. "The work I do," I said clearly, my voice carrying across the silent crowd, "requires discretion. People in my position don't typically advertise our roles at social gatherings." "But what agency?" she pressed, her reporter instincts overriding her embarrassment. "CIA? NSA? Homeland Security?" Director Walsh stepped forward. "Deputy Director Matthews serves with the Defense Intelligence Agency, specializing in counterintelligence operations and strategic threat assessment. She holds one of the highest security clearances in the federal government and has been instrumental in preventing numerous threats to national security over the past 15 years. The crowd's collective intake of breath was audible. Someone in the back whispered, "Holy shit," with the kind of awe usually reserved for celebrity sightings. Michael Chen, still recording, managed to stammer, "You mean she's like a spy?" "I mean," Director Walsh said with the patience of someone accustomed to explaining complex realities to civilians, "she's one of the most skilled intelligence professionals currently serving our country. Her work has saved countless lives, though for obvious reasons most of her achievements must remain classified." I watched Vanessa's face as the implications settled in. The awkward girl she'd dismissed as a failure had spent the last 25 years operating at the highest levels of national security. While Vanessa had been building a career in local television, I'd been briefing senators, coordinating with foreign intelligence services, and managing operations that would never make the evening news precisely because they'd been successful. Principal Davidson emerged from the crowd, his face pale with shock. "Sarah? I had no idea. None of us had any idea." "That was the point," I replied gently. "People in my line of work prefer to keep our personal and professional lives separate." "Deputy Director," the Air Force officer interrupted, checking his watch. "We're approaching our departure window." I nodded and began walking toward the helicopter. Behind me, I could hear the crowd erupting into conversations. People processing what they'd just witnessed, probably already composing social media posts that would turn this reunion into legend. But as I reached the aircraft, Vanessa's voice cut through the noise one more time. "Sarah, wait!" I turned to see her pushing through the crowd, her earlier composure completely gone. When she reached me, she was breathing hard, whether from exertion or emotion I couldn't tell. I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely audible over the helicopter's engines. "What I said earlier, about you not mattering, about accomplishing nothing. I had no idea." I studied her face, seeing the woman I'd once known hiding behind years of television makeup and professional ambition. "Vanessa, you said exactly what you believed to be true based on the information you had. That's what journalists do." But I was wrong, completely wrong. "About some things," I agreed, "but not about everything. You built an impressive career. You do matter. Success takes many forms." The helicopter's rotors increased their tempo, signaling our imminent departure. Director Walsh was already aboard, speaking rapidly into a secure phone. The uniformed officers waited by the aircraft, their body language suggesting that whatever situation had prompted this dramatic extraction was deteriorating by the moment. "I have to go," I told Vanessa. "People are depending on decisions that need to be made in the next few hours." She nodded, stepping back as I climbed into the helicopter. Through the window, I could see the entire reunion crowd gathered on the country club lawn. 500 people staring up at the aircraft that had just shattered their understanding of one of their former classmates. As we lifted off, the country club shrank below us, its lights becoming just another constellation in the Connecticut landscape. I strapped myself into the jump seat and accepted the secure tablet that contained my briefing materials, already shifting mental gears from suburban social dynamics to international crisis management. Director Walsh leaned over, her voice barely audible over the engine noise. "Sorry to pull you out of your reunion like that. I know you wanted to keep your cover intact." I glanced down at the lights disappearing below us. "I think that ship has sailed. Any regrets?" I considered the question as I scrolled through the preliminary threat assessment on my tablet. 25 years of carefully maintained anonymity had just been obliterated in the span of 10 minutes. By tomorrow, my face would probably be on every news website in the country, my high school classmates would be fielding interview requests, and my quiet life in Wyoming would be permanently complicated. But I thought about Vanessa's expression when she realized how wrong she'd been. About the crowd of people who had just learned that achievement and importance didn't always come with red carpets and television cameras. About the young people who might see this story and understand that there were ways to serve your country that didn't involve seeking spotlight or recognition. "No," I said finally, "no regrets." The helicopter banked east toward Washington, carrying me back to the world where I belonged, where lives hung in the balance and decisions mattered more than appearances. Behind us, the lights of suburban Connecticut faded into darkness, but I knew that what had happened at the Grand Vista Country Club would echo far beyond this night. Sometimes the most important stories are the ones that stay hidden until the moment they absolutely can't. The Pentagon at midnight carried a different energy than during daylight hours. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead as we strode through corridors that never truly slept. Past offices where analysts worked around the clock monitoring global threats. My heels clicked against polished floors as Director Walsh briefed me on the developing crisis. "Operation Nightfall was compromised 6 hours ago," she explained as we entered the secure elevator that would take us to the classified briefing room. Someone with high-level access leaked the locations of 12 deep-cover assets across Eastern Europe, We've already lost contact with 3 of them. The elevator descended past floors that didn't appear on any public building directory. When the doors opened, we emerged into a command center that looked like something from a science fiction film. Wall-mounted screens displayed real-time intelligence feeds from around the world, while teams of specialists worked at curved workstations, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of classified data streams. How many people knew the complete asset roster? I asked, accepting the secure tablet that contained my full briefing materials. 17, replied Colonel Martinez, a stern-faced woman with silver stars on her shoulders who'd been waiting for our arrival. We're running background checks on all of them, but the leak came from someone with administrative access to the central database. I scrolled through the files, processing names and locations of operatives whose lives now hung in the balance because someone had decided to sell secrets to the highest bidder. These weren't just code names on a computer screen. They were real people with families, people who'd trusted their government to keep them safe while they risked everything to protect American interests abroad. What's our timeline for extraction? I asked. 72 hours before the information gets distributed to hostile intelligence services, Director Walsh replied. After that, anyone still in place becomes a target. The next 4 hours blurred together in a haze of secure communications, strategic planning, and crisis management. I coordinated with intelligence liaisons in 6 different countries, authorized emergency extractions for assets in immediate danger, and worked with cybersecurity specialists to trace the source of the leak. The reunion felt like a distant memory, something that had happened to someone else in another lifetime. But at 3:17 in the morning, my personal phone buzzed with a text message that brought my 2 worlds crashing back together. The message was from my neighbor in Wyoming. Sarah, your face is all over the news. Are you okay? Call me. I showed the message to Director Walsh, who grimaced. How bad is it? Colonel Martinez was already pulling up news websites on one of the command center's screens. The headlines were exactly what I'd feared. Mystery woman, high school reunion interrupted by military helicopter. Small town girl's secret, local nobody revealed as top intelligence official. From wallflower to spy master, the Sarah Matthews story. But it was the video that made my stomach drop. Someone had live-streamed the entire helicopter landing on social media, capturing everything from Director Walsh's arrival to my departure. The clip already had over 2 million views and was spreading across platforms faster than our intelligence analysts could track. Channel 7 is running a special report in 3 hours, Colonel Martinez said, reading from her tablet. Vanessa Sterling is hosting it personally. They're calling it The Secret Among Us, a former classmate's double life. Director Walsh rubbed her temples. We need to control this narrative before it impacts our ongoing operations. Ma'am, I said carefully, with respect, I think we're past the point of controlling anything. The story is out there, and it's going to grow whether we like it or not. She looked at me with the expression she usually reserved for international crises. What are you suggesting? That we get ahead of it. Schedule a controlled interview, release some basic information that satisfies public curiosity without compromising operational security. If we try to suppress this story, it'll just get bigger and more distorted. Absolutely not, Colonel Martinez interjected. Deputy Director Matthews' cover is one of our most valuable assets. We can't burn it for the sake of public relations. With respect, Colonel, my cover is already burned. The question now is whether we manage the damage or let it manage us. Director Walsh considered this for a long moment, her fingers drumming against the conference table. Around us, the command center hummed with activity as other crises demanded attention, but I could feel the weight of her decision settling over our small group. Set up a meeting with the White House press office, she said finally. We'll craft a limited disclosure that acknowledges Deputy Director Matthews' role without revealing operational details. And Sarah? She fixed me with a look that was part concern, part warning. Your life is about to change in ways you can't imagine. I was already beginning to understand that. By dawn, the story had exploded beyond anything we'd anticipated. My high school yearbook photo was being analyzed by cable news pundits, who debated whether someone so ordinary-looking could really have been hiding in plain sight for decades. Social media detectives were digging through every public record they could find, creating elaborate theories about my supposed secret missions. The most viral post came from Michael Chen, who'd uploaded his phone recording of the helicopter landing with the caption, "Plot twist of the century. The quiet girl from our chemistry class has been saving the world while we were arguing about restaurant reviews on Yelp." But it was Vanessa's reporting that cut the deepest. Her special broadcast began with dramatic music and sweeping graphics that made the whole situation look like a Hollywood thriller. She stood in front of the country club, its ruined landscaping still visible in the background, speaking directly into the camera, with the gravity usually reserved for natural disasters. "Good morning. I'm Vanessa Sterling, and I'm here at the Grand Vista Country Club, where last night, a routine high school reunion became the setting for one of the most extraordinary revelations in recent memory." The broadcast cut to footage of the helicopter landing, slowed down and enhanced for maximum dramatic effect. Vanessa's voiceover continued. "The woman you're about to meet was someone I thought I knew. Someone I went to school with, shared lunches with, considered a friend. But last night, I learned that Sarah Matthews has been living a double life that would make fictional spies jealous." What followed was a detailed breakdown of my life that was both remarkably accurate and completely wrong. Vanessa had clearly done her homework, interviewing former teachers, tracking down college acquaintances, and even finding my old landlord from my first apartment in Washington. But the picture she painted was of someone who'd been secretly training to be a spy since high school, deliberately cultivating an unremarkable persona as the perfect cover. The truth was much simpler and less cinematic. I'd joined the Defense Intelligence Agency straight out of college because I believed in public service and happened to have the analytical skills they needed. My cover wasn't an elaborate deception. It was just a preference for privacy and a job that required discretion. But simple truths don't make for compelling television. Sources close to the intelligence community tell us that Matthews has been involved in some of the most sensitive operations of the past 2 decades, Vanessa continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "While we can't reveal details for national security reasons, we're told her work has prevented terrorist attacks, disrupted foreign interference in American elections, and saved countless lives." Some of that was true, some of it was speculation, all of it was now part of a story that had taken on a life of its own. The interview segment was the hardest to watch. Vanessa had somehow tracked down 3 of our former classmates who agreed to appear on camera and share their memories of the real Sarah Matthews. Their recollections had been filtered through the lens of hindsight, transforming ordinary teenage behavior into evidence of secret agent training. "She was always so observant," said Jennifer Walsh, the former student council president who barely knew me in high school. "Like she was studying everyone, memorizing details. We thought she was just shy, but now it makes sense that she was probably practicing surveillance techniques." "She never talked about her family much," added Tommy Rodriguez, who I remembered as the kid who sat behind me in AP History, always deflected personal questions. Classic spy behavior, if you think about it. Even Mrs. Henderson, my old English teacher, got in on the revisionist history. Sarah had this way of blending into the background, but her essays showed such sophisticated understanding of geopolitical issues. I always wondered where she got such mature perspectives on international affairs. By the time the special report aired, I'd been transformed from an ordinary person who happened to work in intelligence into a master spy who'd been playing an elaborate decades-long game. The narrative was seductive, dramatic, and almost entirely fictional. But the most painful part came at the end, when Vanessa addressed the camera directly. "I owe Sarah Matthews an apology," she said, and for a moment, her professional composure cracked slightly. "Last night I said things that were cruel and unfair. I judged someone based on appearances and assumptions, and I was completely wrong. Sarah, if you're watching this, I'm sorry, and thank you for your service to our country." It was a graceful apology, professionally delivered and undoubtedly sincere. But it was also being broadcast to millions of people, turning my personal humiliation and redemption into public entertainment. My phone had been ringing nonstop since the story broke. Interview requests from major networks, documentary producers wanting to tell my story, even a Hollywood agent who claimed he could get me a 7-figure book deal. I had turned off the ringer hours ago, but I could see the voicemail notifications piling up. Director Walsh found me in the small break room adjacent to the command center, nursing my fourth cup of coffee and staring at the muted television screen where my high school photo was being analyzed by a panel of former CIA officers. "The White House wants to see you at 10, she said, settling into the chair across from me. "The president is personally interested in how we handle this situation." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Everything I'd worked to build over the past 25 years, my anonymity, my ability to move through the world unnoticed, my effectiveness as an intelligence officer, had been destroyed in a single evening. "There's something else," Director Walsh continued gently. "We've been monitoring social media response to the story. It's not all bad news." She handed me her tablet, open to a Twitter thread that had gone viral overnight. The original post was from a young woman in military fatigues, standing in what looked like a deployment somewhere overseas. To Deputy Director Sarah Matthews, "Thank you for showing us that heroes don't always look like what we expect. Your story inspired me to apply for intelligence officer training. Representation matters. #Real Heroes Work in Silence." The replies stretched on for hundreds of comments. Women in uniform sharing their own stories of serving without recognition. Young people talking about careers in public service they'd never considered before. Parents telling their daughters that they could grow up to be anything. Even secret agents. "You've become a symbol," Director Walsh said. "Like it or not, you represent something important to a lot of people." I scrolled through more responses, seeing my story reflected through dozens of different lenses. Some saw it as a triumph of the underestimated outsider. Others viewed it as proof that the intelligence community was more diverse than Hollywood suggested. A few interpreted it as a cautionary tale about judging people by appearances. All of them were projecting their own hopes and fears onto a situation they understood only through 30-second video clips and news reports that prioritized drama over accuracy. "What happens now?" I asked. Director Walsh smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Now you learn to live as Sarah Matthews, public figure, instead of Sarah Matthews, anonymous intelligence officer. The job hasn't changed, but everything else has." Outside the break room windows, Washington was waking up to another day of global crises and international tensions. But somewhere in Connecticut, 500 former high school classmates were probably checking their phones to see if their own reunion had made the morning news. I thought about Vanessa, probably preparing for the media interviews that would follow her scoop of a lifetime. About the country club staff cleaning up the damage from the helicopter landing. About my neighbors in Wyoming trying to process the revelation that the woman who fed their cats and shoveled their driveways had been briefing senators and coordinating international operations. The world had shifted overnight, but the work remained the same. People still needed protecting, threats still needed neutralizing, and crises still required someone willing to make the hard decisions in rooms where cameras weren't allowed. I finished my coffee and stood up, straightening my jacket and preparing to face whatever came next. The reunion was over, but the real story was just beginning. The Oval Office felt smaller than I'd imagined it would. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced above the presidential seal woven into the carpet. President Harrison sat behind the resolute desk, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed the briefing folder that contained my entire professional history condensed into 20 pages of sanitized facts. "Deputy Director Matthews," he said without looking up, "in 30 years of public service, I've never had an intelligence officer become a household name overnight. We're in uncharted territory here." Director Walsh sat to my left, her posture rigid with the tension that came from having one of her top assets suddenly become a liability through no fault of their own. Across from us, White House Chief of Staff Margaret Chen, no relation to my classmate Michael, tapped her stylus against her tablet as she monitored real-time social media sentiment analysis. "The story has international legs now," Chen reported. "BBC, Deutsche Welle, Al Jazeera, everyone's picking it up. The angle varies by region, but the core narrative is consistent. Ordinary American woman secretly protecting national security." President Harrison finally looked up, studying my face with the intensity of someone accustomed to reading people across negotiating tables and crisis situations. "How are you holding up, Deputy Director?" It was a surprisingly personal question, from someone who dealt primarily in policy implications and strategic considerations. "I'm adapting, Mr. President." "That's not what I asked." His tone was gentle but firm. "Your cover identity just got burned in front of the entire world. Your private life is being dissected by strangers on the internet. Your effectiveness as a covert operative is permanently compromised. How are you doing as a person?" The unexpected empathy in his voice caught me off guard. I'd prepared for discussions about operational security, public relations strategy, and damage control. I hadn't expected the commander-in-chief to ask how I felt about having my life turned upside down. "Honestly, sir, I'm still processing it. 24 hours ago, I was anonymous. Now my high school yearbook photo is being analyzed on cable news." President Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "I remember my first week as president. Suddenly, every casual comment became a headline. Every personal choice became a political statement. The fishbowl effect is disorienting until you learn to work with it instead of against it. With respect, Mr. President, you chose to run for office. I chose to serve quietly." "True," he acknowledged, "but sometimes circumstances choose us, regardless of our preferences. The question now is how we move forward in a way that serves both your career and the country's interests." Chief of Staff Chen leaned forward, consulting her tablet. "We've identified 3 potential paths. First, we could attempt damage control, deny specifics, minimize your role, try to return you to something resembling your previous anonymity." Director Walsh shook her head. "That ship has sailed. The story's too big now, and any attempt at denial would just fuel conspiracy theories." "Path 2, Chen continued, "we embrace transparency, controlled interviews, carefully managed public appearances. Use your story to improve recruitment and public support for intelligence agencies." "And Path 3? I asked. President Harrison answered this one himself. "We promote you out of field operations entirely. Deputy Director of Public Affairs, liaison with Congress, maybe eventually director of the entire agency. Your operational days are over regardless. We might as well capitalize on your newfound visibility." The room fell silent as the implications settled in. My career in active intelligence work, the thing I'd devoted my adult life to, was effectively over. The skills I'd spent decades developing, the networks I'd carefully cultivated, the hard-won expertise in reading foreign operatives and managing complex international relationships, all of it was now useless because my face was too recognizable, my story too public. "There's a 4th option," I said quietly. The 3 most powerful people in the national security apparatus looked at me expectantly. "I resign. Take early retirement. Disappear back to Wyoming. Let the story die a natural death. In 6 months, there'll be some other crisis dominating the news cycle, and Sarah Matthews, the mysterious spy, will become a trivia question." President Harrison removed his reading glasses and set them on the desk with deliberate care. "Is that what you want?" I thought about the question seriously. Part of me was tempted by the idea of returning to anonymity, of feeding my neighbor's cats and shopping at the local grocery store without worrying about recognition. But another part of me had been energized by some of the responses to my story. Young women considering careers in intelligence, public servants feeling validated for their quiet contributions, people beginning to understand that national security involved more than just soldiers and diplomats. "No, sir, it's not what I want, but it might be what's best for the agency." "Let me tell you what I think is best for the agency," he said, standing and walking to the window that overlooked the south lawn. "I think we need more Sarah Matthews, not fewer. People who serve without seeking credit, who do essential work without demanding recognition, who understand that real security comes from competence, not performance." He turned back to face us. "Your story resonates because it reveals something true about how the government actually works. Most of the people keeping us safe aren't household names. They're professionals doing essential work in offices and field stations that never make the news. You've become a symbol of that reality." Chief of Staff Chen looked up from her tablet. The overnight polling is actually encouraging. 73% approval for, quote, intelligence professionals like Deputy Director Matthews. 68% support for increased funding for human intelligence operations. Your story is good for the agency's public image, but terrible for my operational effectiveness, I pointed out. In your current role, yes, Director Walsh admitted, but effectiveness takes many forms. How many qualified candidates do you think will apply for intelligence positions because they saw your story and realized this could be a career path they'd never considered? President Harrison returned to his desk. I'm not going to order you to become a public figure, Deputy Director. That's a personal choice that comes with costs I can't fully compensate you for. But I will say this, the country needs people willing to step into roles they didn't choose because circumstances demand it. A soft knock interrupted our conversation. The president's secretary entered and whispered something in his ear that made his expression tighten with concern. Excuse me, he said to our group, then spoke into his desk phone. Patch me through to General Morrison. While he took the call, Chen showed me her tablet screen. The news cycle had already moved on to analyzing my story's implications. Think pieces about gender and intelligence work, op-eds about the importance of anonymous public service, even academic articles about the psychology of undercover operations. My 15 minutes of fame were expanding into a broader conversation about how modern government actually functioned. But it was the international coverage that surprised me most. A French newspaper had run a profile comparing me to their own intelligence heroines. A German think tank had published an analysis of how my revelation affected European perceptions of American intelligence capabilities. Even Pravda had weighed in, though their take was predictably cynical about American propaganda efforts. President Harrison finished his call and rejoined our conversation. We have a more immediate problem, the leak that compromised Operation Nightfall. We've identified the source. Director Walsh straightened in her chair. Who? Someone very close to home. We'll need your expertise to determine how much damage has been done and what our response options are. He looked directly at me. This is exactly the kind of situation where your skills are invaluable, regardless of your public profile. The irony wasn't lost on me. While news networks debated my future and social media analyzed my past, the real work of protecting national security continued. Crises didn't pause for personal transitions or public relations considerations. What do you need from me? I asked. Right now, be who you've always been. Do the job you've always done. We'll figure out the public aspects as we go. President Harrison stood, signaling the end of our meeting. But Sarah? Don't underestimate the value of what happened at that reunion. Sometimes the most important victories happen when people realize that heroes don't always look like what they expected. As we left the Oval Office, Director Walsh fell into step beside me. He's right, about the symbolic value. I've already received calls from 3 congressional committee chairs asking when you'll be available to testify about intelligence community diversity initiatives. I haven't agreed to become a poster child for anything, I reminded her. You don't have to agree, you already are one. The car ride back to the Pentagon gave me time to process the morning's developments. Through the tinted windows, I watched Washington go about its daily business. Tourists taking selfies in front of monuments, government workers hurrying between meetings, protesters making their voices heard on the steps of federal buildings. Normal life continuing while my own existence had been fundamentally altered. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Ms. Matthews, this is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7. Vanessa Sterling gave me your contact information. I'm a producer, working on a follow-up story about how your revelation is inspiring young women to consider intelligence careers. Would you be available for a brief interview? I deleted the message without responding, but it was followed immediately by another from a different news organization, then another from a magazine, then a documentary filmmaker, then a book publisher. The outside world had decided that Sarah Matthews was now a public commodity, and everyone wanted their piece of the story. Back at the Pentagon, I threw myself into the urgent work of tracking down the Operation Nightfall leak. It was a relief to focus on something concrete, analyzing communication patterns, cross-referencing access logs, building profiles of potential suspects. The familiar rhythm of investigation provided an anchor in a day that had been mostly about managing the consequences of unwanted fame. But even here, my changed status was evident. Colleagues who had worked alongside me for years now looked at me differently. Some with new respect, others with the awkwardness that comes from realizing you never really knew someone. The easy anonymity that had made me effective was gone, replaced by a hypervisibility that would require entirely new strategies and skills. Late that afternoon, as I was reviewing intercepted communications from the suspect, Colonel Martinez knocked on my office door. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "Says she's a friend from high school." I looked up from my computer screen, confused. "Friend from high school?" "She says her name is Patricia Hoffman. Claims she drove down from Boston because she wanted to apologize in person." Patricia, the pediatric surgeon who had been introduced at the reunion as one of our class's success stories. I vaguely remembered her from advanced placement classes, but we'd never been particularly close. The idea that she would drive 5 hours to Washington just to see me seemed surreal. "Should I tell her you're unavailable?" Colonel Martinez asked. I considered it. The smart play would be to avoid any unnecessary contact with reunion attendees, at least until the media attention died down. But something about Patricia's gesture, driving all that way just to apologize, suggested this might be different from the media circus surrounding my story. "No," I said, saving my work and closing the classified files on my screen. "Send her in." Patricia entered my office looking nothing like the confident professional who had taken the stage 2 nights earlier. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, she wore jeans and a MIT sweatshirt, and her face showed the fatigue of someone who had been wrestling with difficult realizations. "Sarah," she said, stopping just inside the doorway, "I hope it's okay that I came. I know this must be an incredibly difficult time for you." "It's been an adjustment," I admitted, gesturing for her to take a seat. "Patricia, right? Pediatric surgery?" She nodded, settling into the chair across from my desk. "That's part of why I'm here. At the reunion, when they were introducing the distinguished alumni, I felt so proud to be recognized. But after what happened with the helicopter, after learning about your real work, I realized how shallow that pride was." I waited for her to continue. "I save children's lives," she said. "It's important work, meaningful work. But it's also work that gets recognition, gratitude. Medical journals, articles, speaking opportunities. You've been saving lives too, probably many more lives than I have, but you never got any credit for it. You couldn't even tell people what you did." She paused, looking around my office with its government-issued furniture and security protocols. "I wanted to thank you. And to say I'm sorry that it took a dramatic helicopter landing for any of us to understand who you really are." Her words carried a sincerity that was different from the media coverage or political calculations I'd been dealing with all day. This wasn't about narratives or public relations. It was about one person recognizing another's service and feeling compelled to acknowledge it. "Patricia, you don't need to apologize for not knowing classified information," I said gently. "Maybe not for not knowing," she replied, "but I should apologize for assuming. At the reunion, I looked at you and saw someone who hadn't achieved anything significant. I made judgments based on appearances and conventional measures of success. That was wrong, and it was unfair." We talked for another 20 minutes about the complexities of different types of service, the challenges of meaningful work that couldn't be shared, and the arbitrary nature of public recognition. When she finally left, I felt something I hadn't experienced since the helicopter landing, a sense that maybe this unwanted visibility might have some unexpected benefits. If Patricia Hoffman, an accomplished surgeon, could be prompted to reconsider her assumptions about success and service, maybe other people could too. Maybe the story that had destroyed my anonymity could also challenge others to think differently about the quiet heroes working around them every day. But as I returned to analyzing the communications logs that would help us identify the Operation Nightfall leak, I knew that symbolic value was cold comfort for the operational reality I now faced. Sarah Matthews, anonymous intelligence officer, was gone forever. Sarah Matthews, reluctant public figure, was still figuring out who she would become. 6 months later, I stood at the podium of the Senate Intelligence Committee hearing room, raising my right hand to be sworn in as the new Director of Strategic Intelligence Operations. The cameras that had once terrified me now felt like old acquaintances, and the questions from senators seemed almost gentle compared to the international crises I'd been managing since that night at the Grand Vista Country Club. My confirmation hearing had been surprisingly smooth. The same visibility that had destroyed my covert career had made me virtually unassailable as a nominee. It's hard to question the qualifications of someone whose dramatic revelation had become a symbol of dedicated public service. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" Senator Williams asked. "I do," I replied, my voice carrying clearly across the packed hearing room. The questions were predictable. How would I handle the transition from field operations to administrative oversight? What lessons had I learned from my unique experience of having my cover blown? How would I use my newfound public profile to improve recruitment and congressional relations? But it was Senator Rodriguez who asked the question that mattered most. "Director Matthews, your story has inspired thousands of young Americans to consider careers in intelligence. What would you tell them about the realities of this work?" I looked out at the gallery, where I spotted several familiar faces. Patricia Hoffman had flown down from Boston to attend the hearing. Michael Chen was live streaming from the back row, probably turning my confirmation into content for his tech industry followers. And in the front row, wearing a navy suit that actually looked expensive this time, sat Vanessa Sterling. We'd had lunch the week before, our first real conversation since the reunion. She'd apologized again, more thoroughly and privately this time, and I'd finally been able to explain that her initial assessment hadn't been entirely wrong. I had been drifting somewhat aimlessly through life until circumstances forced me to step up. Sometimes it takes external pressure to reveal what we're truly capable of. "Senator," I said, "I'd tell them that meaningful work often happens in quiet rooms, away from recognition or applause. The most important victories are the ones that prevent tragedies rather than responding to them. And sometimes the greatest service you can perform is to remain invisible while keeping others safe." I paused, thinking about all the young women who had reached out over the past months, sharing their own stories of quiet competence and unrecognized contribution. But I'd also tell them that being seen has its own power. Since my story became public, we've received a 40% increase in qualified applications from women and minorities. Representation matters, even in fields where secrecy is paramount. Sometimes stepping into the light serves the mission better than staying in the shadows. The hearing concluded with unanimous approval for my nomination. As senators filed out, chatting about lunch plans and afternoon meetings, I remained at the witness table, processing the magnitude of what had just happened. Vanessa approached as the room emptied. "Congratulations, Madam Director." "Thank you, and thank you for being here." "I wouldn't have missed it," she hesitated, then added, "I've been working on a documentary series about women in intelligence. Nothing sensational, just thoughtful profiles of professionals who've dedicated their lives to protecting the country. Would you consider participating? Not as the mysterious spy this time, but as yourself, Sarah Matthews, the woman who chose service over celebrity." I considered her proposal. The old Sarah would have declined immediately, protecting her privacy and maintaining professional distance. But the new reality of my life meant that privacy was a luxury I could no longer afford, and professional distance might actually limit my effectiveness rather than enhance it. "Send me the proposal," I said. "Let's see if we can tell the story right this time." That evening, I returned to my apartment in Arlington, the same modest two-bedroom place I'd lived in for 8 years, though now it required security sweeps and had agents posted discreetly nearby. My cats, Buster and Luna, greeted me with the same indifference they'd always shown, apparently unimpressed by my promotion or security detail. My secure phone rang as I was opening a can of food for them. Director Walsh's face appeared on the screen, calling from her new office at CIA headquarters. She'd been promoted as well, partly as a reward for managing the post-reunion crisis so effectively. "How does it feel to be the youngest intelligence director in history?" she asked. "Terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure," I admitted. "Have you seen the latest recruitment numbers? Up 60% overall, and we're finally achieving demographic targets we've been working toward for decades. Your story changed the conversation about who belongs in intelligence work." After the call ended, I poured myself a glass of wine and settled onto my couch with the files I'd brought home: tomorrow's briefing materials, personnel reports, budget analyses. The work itself hadn't changed much, but the context had shifted dramatically. Instead of operating in anonymity, I was now a visible symbol of something larger than myself. My personal phone buzzed with a text message from a number I didn't recognize. "Ms. Matthews, my name is Elena Rodriguez. I'm 16 years old, and I just got accepted to the summer program at the National Security Agency because your story inspired me to apply. Thank you for showing me that quiet girls can save the world too." I smiled, screenshotting the message to add to the folder I'd been keeping of similar notes. Hundreds of them now, from young women considering intelligence careers, from parents who'd never thought to encourage their daughters toward public service, from veterans who felt validated in their own quiet contributions to national security. The reunion had been meant to celebrate conventional success, the achievements that came with recognition, applause, and public validation. But sometimes the most important victories are the ones that happen when nobody's watching, in secure conference rooms and encrypted communications, in the daily choice to put service above self-interest. I'd learned that being underestimated could be a strategic advantage, but being recognized had its own power. The young women reaching out to me might never have considered intelligence careers if they hadn't seen that someone who looked like them, someone who'd been dismissed and overlooked, could rise to positions of real influence and responsibility. As I reviewed tomorrow's agenda, briefing the National Security Council, meeting with congressional liaisons, overseeing 3 ongoing operations that would never make the news if they succeeded, I thought about that night 6 months ago, when I stood on the country club steps, waiting for a helicopter that would change everything. They'd told me to leave the reunion because I didn't matter, because I hadn't accomplished anything significant, because I was taking up space that should have been reserved for people who'd made something of themselves. But sometimes the most important work happens in the spaces between what people see and what people know. Sometimes saving the world looks like pushing paper in Wyoming, or briefing senators in unmarked conference rooms, or making decisions that prevent headlines rather than creating them. And sometimes, when the moment demands it, even the quietest among us must step into the light, not for recognition or validation, but because the work requires it, because others need to see that heroism comes in many forms, because the next generation deserves to know that they too can serve their country in ways that matter. The helicopter had landed, everyone had stood, and Sarah Matthews had finally been seen for who she'd always been, someone willing to do whatever the job required, whether that meant disappearing into anonymity or accepting the responsibilities that came with unwanted fame. In the end, it wasn't about the applause. It was about the work, the mission, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that somewhere, because of choices made in secure rooms by dedicated professionals, people were safer than they knew. That was legacy enough for anyone. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now, and hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.